In the shadow of the White Mountains, where the wind whispers through ancient trees, there exists a story older than memory. It's not a tale of kings or warriors, nor of great cities or glittering crowns. It's a tale carved in stone, silent watchers standing guard over forgotten paths, their faces twisted in expressions of timeless sorrow and fierce determination. The Pukel-men are more than statues, they are echoes of a people who gave their lives to protect what they loved. Long before the great wars of Middle-earth, before the tales of the One Ring began to stir, there was a time when the world was wilder, untamed. In these untamed lands, the Drúedain lived. They were a quiet people, short and broad, with piercing eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. They were neither great builders nor warriors, yet their hands held a power that no sword or crown could match. They carved the Pukel-men, stone sentinels that stood like grim guardians on forgotten trails. The Drúedain didn't sculpt the Pukel-men for art or vanity. Each carving was an act of devotion, a piece of their soul etched into rock. Legends whispered that the Pukel-men weren't merely stone, they were alive in a way the living couldn't understand. It was said that when danger approached, the carvings would stir, their stony eyes flaring with a fire no mortal could withstand. Enemies fled in terror at the sight, while those under the Drúedain's protection walked safely beneath their unyielding gaze. Their story begins not in glory but in exile. The Drúedain were wanderers, driven from their lands by more powerful men who sought to conquer and dominate. Wherever they went, they carried their pain and their wisdom. They knew the wilderness like an old friend, and it welcomed them, sheltering them in its hidden places. But even in these remote havens, they were not safe. Greedy eyes followed, seeking to destroy what the Drúedain cherished most. The Pukel-men became their answer to this ceaseless threat. To outsiders, these carvings looked grotesque, hunched figures with gnarled faces and sunken eyes. But to the Drúedain, they were protectors, fierce and loyal, bound to the land with the strength of the mountains themselves. Their presence turned the Drúedain's fragile sanctuaries into fortresses. There's an old tale, told in hushed tones, of a warlord who sought to take what the Drúedain had guarded for centuries. His army was vast, his weapons sharp, and his heart filled with cruelty. The Drúedain, knowing they could not match his might, gathered around their Pukel-men. They sang to them, not songs of joy, but of sorrow, their voices trembling with the weight of their grief. The warlord laughed, thinking them cowards. That night, the mountain seemed to come alive. The ground trembled as if the earth itself was weeping. The warlord's men awoke to see the Pukel-men standing where there had been only shadows. Their eyes burned with an unnatural glow, and their stone faces seemed to move, snarling and growling like beasts. The army fled in terror, leaving the Drúedain untouched. When dawn came, the Pukel-men were still as death, their secrets safe in the silence. But the Drúedain paid a price for their guardians. Carving the Pukel-men was not just a matter of skill, but of sacrifice. Each stone figure held a part of the carver's spirit, bound to it in an unbreakable bond. It said that those who gave too much of themselves to the carvings would wither away, their life force drained until only their creation remained, unyielding and eternal. The most haunting of these stories tells of a woman, known only as Gale. She was a master carver, her hands capable of shaping stone into forms so lifelike they seemed to breathe. When her village was threatened, she poured every ounce of her being into creating a Pukel-man unlike any other. It was massive, towering over the rest, its face a mask of anguish and fury. As she finished the final stroke, she collapsed, her body lifeless. But the Pukel-man stood, and it still stands to this day, watching over the land she loved. The Pukel-men are more than guardians, they are symbols of sacrifice, of a love so fierce it could defy death itself. They are the voice of the Drúedain, speaking not in words, but in the unyielding language of stone. Their presence lingers in the paths they once protected, a reminder that even the smallest, most forgotten people can leave a mark that time cannot erase. And yet, as the centuries passed, the Drúedain faded. Some say they disappeared, their spirit drained by the weight of their creations. Others believe they chose to leave, retreating to a place where they could rest at last. The Pukel-men remain, silent and still, their secrets locked within the stone. But there are whispers, faint and fleeting, that they are not gone, only waiting. waiting for a time when they will be needed again, when their sorrowful faces will turn once more to watch over the living. Beyond the winding paths and hidden trails where the Pukel-men stand, there lies a connection to something older and greater than anyone can fathom. Perhaps they are not merely relics of the past, but bridges to something eternal. And as the wind moves through the mountains, carrying stories no one can hear, one cannot help but wonder what the Pukel-men still see, and what they might yet protect. In the shadow of ancient forests where the sunlight barely reached the ground, the Drúedain moved like whispers through the trees. They were a people apart, not hidden, but unnoticed, as though the world itself chose not to disturb them. Small in stature, their faces were rugged and weathered, carved by lives lived close to the earth. Their eyes, however, held something that words could not explain, a calm intensity, as if they could see not just the world before them, but the world beneath and beyond. The Drúedain were wanderers, yet they never seemed lost. Their footsteps left no trace, their voices barely more than murmurs among the leaves. They had no grand cities or lofty towers. Their homes were simple, built from the materials the forest willingly offered. To an outsider, their existence might have seemed primitive, but to the Drúedain, it was harmony. They took only what they needed and gave back in ways only they understood. They spoke to the trees as though they were old friends, to the rivers as if they shared secrets. The animals trusted them, moving without fear through their encampments. Birds often perched near them, their songs blending with the Drúedain's soft chanting, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. This connection to the natural world wasn't something they learned, it was part of who they were, as vital as breath. Stories passed from one generation to the next, whispered under starlit skies or around small, crackling fires. These tales weren't just entertainment, they were truths woven into the fabric of their lives. They spoke of a time when the world was whole, before greed and war tore it apart. The Drúedain believed that every living thing carried a piece of that original harmony, and their role was to protect and nurture it, no matter the cost. One tale told of a child who wandered too far from the village and fell into a rushing river. The currents were fierce, dragging the boy toward a deadly cascade. His mother stood on the bank, her face calm but her hands trembling. She knelt and placed her palms on the ground, whispering words no one could understand. The river seemed to pause, its fury subsiding just long enough for the boy to climb to safety. When asked how she had done it, she only smiled and said, "The water remembers kindness." The Drúedain's power wasn't in weapons or numbers, but in their connection to the world around them. They could sense danger before it arrived, feel the shift in the wind that warned of a coming storm. It was said that they could even guide the growth of plants, coaxing them to bloom in places where no life should exist. Outsiders sometimes called this magic, but the Drúedain didn't see it that way. To them, it was simply knowing how to listen. Their carvings were an extension of this listening. Every Pukel-man began as a quiet conversation between the carver and the stone. The Drúedain believed that each rock held a spirit, not alive in the way animals or trees were, but aware nonetheless. They never forced their tools against the stone. Instead, they worked with it, coaxing its hidden form to the surface. Each Pukel-man bore the marks of its maker, not just their skill, but their love, their pain, their hope. Their culture wasn't without its struggles. The Drúedain were often seen as strange or even frightening by those who didn't understand them. Their rugged appearance and quiet ways made them easy targets for suspicion. Stories spread that they were sorcerers or worse, and fear turned to violence. They were driven from their lands time and again, their homes burned, their people scattered. But the Drúedain endured. They carried their traditions, their songs, and their stories wherever they went. In their hearts, they knew that the land remembered them, even when men tried to erase their presence. They left behind carvings, songs etched into the wind, and trails only they could follow. A traveler once spoke of meeting a Drúedain elder in the heart of a dense forest. The elder sat by a small fire, his face lined with the weight of years. Around his neck hung a simple pendant, a stone carved into the shape of a Pukel-man. When asked about it, the elder's eyes grew distant, and he said, "This is my brother." When the world grew dark, he chose to stay behind, to watch and wait. He stands still, but his heart beats for us. The Drúedain's beliefs centered on this idea of sacrifice and connection. To them, life wasn't a single thread but a tapestry, each being woven into the other. They didn't fear death, for they believed it was simply another thread in the weave, binding them closer to the world they loved. There was a ceremony they performed for their young, a quiet rite of passage. The child would be led to a sacred place, a clearing where the Pukel-men stood in solemn ranks. The elders would sing, their voices low and steady, as the child placed their hands on the stone. They would stand there, silent, until they felt the heartbeat of the earth beneath their feet. Only then would they be considered part of the whole, not just a child of the Drúedain but a child of the land itself. Even now, when so much of their world has faded into myth, the Drúedain spirit lingers. The Pukel-men stand as silent witnesses to their love, their loss, their unyielding connection to a world that often cast them aside. They are more than statues, they are memories carved in stone, waiting for the day when their maker's songs will be heard once more. The forest was silent except for the sound of chipping stone. The rhythmic strikes of the chisel echoed faintly, blending with the soft rustling of leaves. The figure bent over the rock was deliberate and calm, moving with a patience that spoke of devotion. Each strike left a mark, a piece of the stone yielding to the maker's touch. It wasn't simply a carving, it was a communion. The stone had been waiting for this, as if it held its breath through countless seasons until the right hands found it. The Pukel-men stood, grim and solemn, scattered across the lands like forgotten sentinels. Their stout forms were rough yet deliberate, their faces weathered by time but still brimming with meaning. They bore wide mouths that seemed to whisper unspoken truths, eyes deeply hollowed as if gazing into a world unseen by mortal eyes. There was a weight to them, not just of stone, but of purpose. They were guardians, protectors, perhaps even warnings. Every statue told a story, and no two were the same. Some bore crowns of twisted roots, others were scarred with lines that seemed almost like ancient runes. Their bodies were thick and solid, their limbs crude but powerful. The Drúedain who created them saw no need for perfection, instead, they sought truth. The figures reflected the resilience and strength of the earth itself, unpolished, unyielding, eternal. The carving process wasn't a task, it was a ritual. The Drúedain didn't choose just any stone. They walked the forests and hills, searching for one that called to them. They believed the spirit of the stone chose the carver as much as the carver chose the stone. Once found, the rock was treated with reverence. It was cleansed with water drawn from sacred springs and adorned with leaves and flowers as offerings. Only then could the work begin. It started with whispers. The carver would speak to the stone, their words soft and rhythmic, as though reciting a prayer. The first strike of the chisel was hesitant, almost like a question. The Drúedain believed the stone would guide their hands, showing them what it wanted to become. Every cut and scrape was a dialogue, a conversation between the spirit of the rock and the soul of the artist. Hours turned to days, and days to weeks. Time didn't matter. The carver worked until the statue revealed itself fully. To rush would be an insult, a betrayal of the trust between stone and maker. The Drúedain saw their work as sacred. It wasn't merely about creating something to look at but giving life to a presence that would stand long after they were gone. Sometimes, the carvings were made for protection. These guardians were placed at the edges of their settlements, their faces fierce and unyielding. The Drúedain believed the Pukel-men held the power to ward off evil spirits and ill fortune. Travelers passing through would often pause before these statues, feeling their weight, their silent authority. Many swore they could sense a faint hum in the air, as if the figures were alive, watching, waiting. Other carvings carried the weight of sorrow. These were created in times of loss, their forms infused with grief and remembrance. A mother mourning a child might carve a Pukel-man with tender hands, shaping it to carry the memory of a small face now gone. A warrior lost in battle might be honored with a guardian that bore his strength, his courage, his fire. These statues stood not just as markers but as bridges, connecting the living and the lost. The act of carving was intimate, almost sacred. The tools themselves were treated with care, handed down through generations. Chisels were often adorned with small carvings of their own, symbols of protection or gratitude. Before each carving session, the carver would cleanse their hands with ash and water, whispering words of respect for the stone they were about to touch. When the Pukel-men were finally complete, they were not left alone. The Drúedain would gather around them, singing songs that rose and fell like the wind through the trees. These songs were gifts, meant to bind the statues to the land and to the people who had created them. It was said that the Pukel-men absorbed these melodies, holding them in their silent hearts. Even after centuries, those who listened closely might still hear faint echoes of those ancient tunes. The artistic significance of the Pukel-men lay not in their beauty but in their truth. They were raw and honest, unafraid to show the scars and imperfections of life. They weren't meant to dazzle or impress, but to endure. Their creators didn't seek admiration, they sought connection. To the Drúedain, the Pukel-men were extensions of themselves, silent reminders of their place in the world. The craftsmanship was simple but powerful. The lines were bold, the shape solid. The Drúedain believed in the strength of simplicity. They didn't polish or refine their work, leaving the natural texture of the stone intact. This roughness wasn't a flaw, it was a testament to the unity between maker and material. The Drúedain didn't seek to dominate the stone but to honor it, to bring forth its voice. Over time, the rituals surrounding the Pukel-men took on even greater significance. Some believed the statues held the spirits of the Drúedain themselves, standing watch over the lands they loved. Others saw them as vessels for the whispers of the earth, messages carved in stone for those who cared to listen. Whatever the truth, the Pukel-men stood as silent witnesses to a world that had changed around them but could never erase them. Even now, when the Drúedain have all but vanished, the Pukel-men remain. Weathered by time, their forms softened by wind and rain, they stand as reminders of a people who saw the world not as a thing to conquer, but as a home to cherish. Their presence lingers, a quiet hum beneath the noise of the modern world, waiting for those who might stop and hear. The moon hung low over the hills, its light spilling like molten silver onto the ancient stones. A cold wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of something unseen yet undeniably present. Beneath the pale glow, the Pukel-men stood firm and unmoving, their rough features casting shadows that seemed alive with meaning. Travelers passing by often spoke of a strange feeling, a comfort mixed with awe, that these silent sentinels brought. They weren't just statues, they were protectors, ancient guardians imbued with a power no one could fully explain. Legends whispered of their enchantment, of how the Drúedain carved not only with hands, but with hearts full of ancient songs. The stones, it was said, absorbed these songs, taking in their energy until they resonated with a quiet but unyielding strength. Some claimed that the Pukel-men could feel the pulse of the earth beneath them, standing watch against the darkness that threatened to rise. When the wind blew through their hollow eyes, it was not just air but the echoes of old magic, a force that lingered long after its creators had faded into obscurity. There were stories of those who tried to bring harm near the Pukel-men. A thief once dared to deface one of the statues, thinking its crude appearance meant it held no power. As his chisel struck the stone, a sudden gust of wind surged through the valley, cold and biting as winter's breath. The man stumbled, his tools falling from numb hands. He claimed he felt a presence then, a heavy, watchful force that pressed upon his chest and sent terror crawling through his veins. The Drúedain believed the statue had awakened, its silent strength turning away the harm that had threatened it. The Drúedain's craft was not born from whim but from necessity. They lived in a world teeming with unseen dangers, where shadows stretched long and the night held secrets that could not always be faced with swords. The Pukel-men were their answer, guardians crafted with care and bound to the land they protected. The Drúedain wove their chants into the stone, creating more than statues, they created watchmen that never slept. It was said that the magic within the Pukel-men was drawn from the earth itself. The Drúedain, with their deep connection to nature, understood the silent language of the world around them. They knew the rhythm of the seasons, the whispers of the trees, and the heartbeat of the hills. They believed that the stone, though lifeless to many, carried its own quiet power, a reservoir of strength waiting to be awakened. The chants they sang while carving the Pukel-men were keys, unlocking that strength and binding it to their purpose. Travelers who rested near these stone figures often spoke of an unshakable sense of safety, as though the air around the Pukel-men was thicker, more solid, forming an invisible barrier against harm. A mother fleeing with her child once sought refuge near a cluster of the statues. She spoke of how the night, usually full of rustling and distant howls, fell utterly silent. It was as if the darkness itself dared not approach. She slept peacefully, cradled by an unseen force, and when dawn broke, she felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Not all believed in the power of the Pukel-men. Skeptics would mock the stories, dismissing them as fanciful tales born from fear. But those who lived near the statues or who had encountered them on lonely roads knew better. There was a quiet defiance in the way the Pukel-men stood, their faces weathered but unyielding. Whether it was magic, the sheer will of the Drúedain, or something beyond comprehension, the statues exuded a presence that could not be ignored. Some spoke of a darker time when an enemy sought to destroy the Drúedain. A great force descended upon their lands, armed with fire and malice. The Drúedain, outnumbered and outmatched, turned to their stone guardians. As the invaders approached, they found their way blocked, not by men, but by the Pukel-men themselves. The attackers hesitated, their confidence faltering as they faced the stone figures. The air grew heavy, thick with an energy that made their skin crawl. The first man who stepped forward found his torch extinguished by a wind that came from nowhere. Others followed, only to feel an oppressive weight press down upon them, as though unseen hands gripped their shoulders. The invaders fled, their fear greater than their desire for conquest. The Drúedain understood the cost of such power. They never used it lightly, for they believed that the magic within the Pukel-men was not theirs to command, but to honor. They saw themselves as caretakers, guardians of the guardians. When a Pukel-man was damaged by time or nature, the Drúedain would gather to repair it, singing the same chants that had birthed its power. These ceremonies were solemn, filled with a reverence that spoke of the bond between the people and their protectors. Even now, long after the Drúedain have passed into history, the Pukel-men remain. Their magic, though quiet, lingers. Travelers still speak of the strange feeling they get when they pass these ancient figures, a mixture of comfort and unease. Some say the statues watch them, their hollow eyes following every movement. Others claim to hear faint whispers carried on the wind, voices too soft to understand, but too present to ignore. As the moonlight fades and the first light of dawn touches the earth, the Pukel-men stand unchanging, their silent strength a testament to a time when stone carried the weight of protection, and magic flowed not from wands or spells, but from the hearts of those who believed. They are more than carvings. They are keepers of a power that refuses to be forgotten, waiting for the next call to defend the land they were sworn to guard. The mist clung to the steep paths leading to Dunharrow like a living thing, curling around the feet of those who dared tread its ancient trails. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken warnings. The Pukel-men stood silent on either side of the road, their carved faces worn smooth by time, but still filled with a stern presence that no traveler could ignore. Their gazes, hollow yet all-seeing, seemed to pierce through the veil of fog, as though watching not just the path, but the hearts of those who walked it. The Rohirrim spoke of these guardians with a mixture of reverence and unease. To the common folk, the Pukel-men were a mystery, relics of a time long past, left by the Drúedain who had vanished from the lands of men. But to the warriors and riders of Rohan, these stone sentinels were more than curiosities. They were protectors, keepers of the sacred route that led to the refuge of Dunharrow, the last bastion of safety when darkness fell over the land. Long ago, the Pukel-men had been imbued with the purpose of guarding the paths. When the Drúedain lived, their chants and craft wove magic into the stone, setting them as silent wardens against threats both seen and unseen. Over the years, the Rohirrim came to understand that the power of these figures did not fade with the Drúedain's departure. The statues stood watch still, holding a presence that could be felt in the marrow of one's bones. In the days of great wars, when enemies marched upon Rohan, the paths to Dunharrow became a lifeline. Women, children, and the wounded would flee to the safety of the hidden refuge, trusting their lives to the treacherous mountain road. Those who passed the Pukel-men swore that the statues offered more than silent company. Some spoke of the way the air shifted around them, as though the stones themselves were alive, casting a protective veil over the vulnerable. Others told tales of enemy scouts who never returned from the mountain paths, as though the very earth had risen to swallow them whole. One legend lingered in the hearts of the Rohirrim. During the darkest days of their history, when the shadow of war loomed large, a group of enemy soldiers dared to ascend the path to Dunharrow, hoping to destroy the sanctuary before it could shelter the people of Rohan. They marched with torches, their laughter and shouts filling the air as they taunted the silent watchers along the way. But as they passed the Pukel-men, the atmosphere grew heavy, the forest falling into an unnatural silence. One by one, their torches flickered and died, leaving them in the suffocating dark. What followed was chaos. Some claimed to hear the cries of men echoing down the mountainside, their terror cutting through the night like a blade. Others whispered of shapes moving in the fog, shadows too large and deliberate to be mere tricks of the eye. When the dawn broke, the path was clear, and no trace of the invaders remained. The people of Rohan called it the wrath of the Pukel-men, a warning to all who sought to bring harm to their land. Even in times of peace, the Pukel-men were not forgotten. The riders of Rohan would nod in respect as they passed, a small but sincere acknowledgement of the silent sentinel's presence. Some left offerings, simple things like flowers or small stones, as tokens of gratitude. These acts were not born of superstition but of a deep-rooted belief that the Pukel-men were more than carved figures. They were allies, standing guard against the forces that threatened Rohan's survival. Eowyn, shield maiden of Rohan, often walked the paths to Dunharrow in moments of reflection. She found solace in the presence of the Pukel-men, their unmoving forms a stark contrast to the turmoil within her. She felt a strange connection to them, as though their silence understood her unspoken struggles. It was said that she would sometimes rest her hand against the cool stone, closing her eyes as if seeking strength from the enduring figures. The bond between the Rohirrim and the Pukel-men was one of mutual respect, even if it was tinged with mystery. The warriors trusted the statues, believing that they held the echoes of the Drúedain's ancient power, and the Pukel-men, in their quiet vigilance, continued to fulfill their purpose. Though they did not speak, their presence was a constant reminder that Rohan's strength was not only in its riders but in the land itself and the guardians who had stood with them through countless trials. As the wind howled through the mountain passes, the Pukel-men stood firm, their carved faces unyielding against the passage of time. Their connection to Rohan was unspoken but unbreakable, a bond forged in the fires of hardship and tempered by the enduring spirit of the land. Their story was far from over, for as long as the paths to Dunharrow existed, so too would the guardians who watched over them. The air around the paths of the dead was cold, unnaturally so, as if winter itself had crept into the very stones. The faint whisper of wind through the narrow pass sounded like voices, faint and sorrowful, echoing through the ages. Few dared to tread these haunted paths, where the living and the dead seemed to share uneasy company. But even here, where the weight of the unseen pressed heavily on every step, the Pukel-men stood watch. Their ancient faces, worn and cracked by the passing of countless years, bore witness to all who passed, silent and unyielding. The paths of the dead were more than a road, they were a place where courage faltered, where the hearts of even the bravest could fail. It was said that the souls of the dead lingered here, bound by an ancient curse, unable to find peace. Yet amid this foreboding darkness, the Pukel-men stood as steadfast guardians. Their presence did not offer comfort, but rather a grim reassurance. They were a warning and a protector, an unspoken promise that some forces, even in death, were not to be trifled with. Travelers who dared to venture close told tales of the eerie stillness that surrounded the Pukel-men. Though the statues did not move, their presence was palpable, as if unseen eyes followed every step. Some claimed to feel an invisible hand pressing against their chest, urging them to turn back before it was too late. Others described how the air seemed to hum around the figures, a low vibration that filled their bones with dread. The Pukel-men were guardians of the threshold, standing between the world of the living and the shadowy realm of the dead. Stories passed down through the generations spoke of a connection between the Pukel-men and the cursed dead who haunted the paths. The Drúedain, it was said, had crafted the statues with purpose, their hands shaping the stone with a mixture of reverence and sorrow. They knew the dangers of the paths of the dead, and in their wisdom, they had created the Pukel-men as a barrier. Not to keep travelers out, but to hold the restless spirits at bay. There were whispers that the Pukel-men carried more than the weight of stone. Some believed they held the essence of the Drúedain's own spirit, a fragment of their magic bound into the carvings. It was this power, the villagers said, that kept the cursed dead from straying beyond their haunted road. As long as the Pukel-men stood, the restless souls would remain confined, their torment limited to the shadows. But the Pukel-men were not mere passive watchers. On nights when the moon hid its face and the stars seemed dim, strange things were said to happen near the statues. The air would grow heavy, filled with a sense of something unseen stirring. Those brave, or foolish, enough to remain swore they saw faint glimmers of light, like fireflies, flickering around the figures. The faint scent of earth and moss grew stronger, and the whispers of the dead seemed to recede, muffled as if silenced by the Pukel-men's silent command. One tale, told in hushed tones around fires, spoke of a young man who wandered too close to the paths of the dead during a storm. Lost and desperate, he stumbled upon one of the Pukel-men, its shadow stretching long in the dim light. As lightning lit the sky, he swore he saw the statue's eyes flash, not with malice but with a stern warning. The next morning, he was found at the edge of the pass, unharmed but shaken. He claimed the Pukel-men had turned him away, saving him from the cursed path. The Rohirrim, ever practical, respected these stories. They knew the paths of the dead were no place for the living, and the Pukel-men were their silent allies in keeping the curse contained. Riders who passed near the paths would bow their heads as they crossed the threshold of the Pukel-men's watch. Even hardened warriors, men who feared no blade or beast, would not challenge the silent guardians. Yet, for all their grim purpose, the Pukel-men held a beauty of their own. Their craftsmanship was unmatched, every line and curve imbued with a sense of life despite the stone's cold permanence. The Drúedain had shaped them not only as protectors but as a testament to their own enduring spirit. Each figure was unique, its face etched with expressions that seemed to shift in the flickering light, stern, sorrowful, or watchful. They were more than statues, they were memories carved in stone, a legacy of a people who understood the balance between life and death. There was something almost poetic in the Pukel-men's eternal vigil. They stood where others could not, holding the line against a force that could not be defeated, only contained. Their silence spoke volumes, a reminder that some battles were fought not with swords, but with resilience and sacrifice. The connection between the Pukel-men and the paths of the dead was not one of chance, but of purpose. They were guardians in every sense of the word, protectors of the living from the restless dead, and of the dead from their own boundless torment. The path ahead may have been haunted, but with the Pukel-men standing guard, there was a faint glimmer of hope that even in the darkest places, order could prevail over chaos. The forest stood in silence, its trees ancient and tangled, their roots woven like secrets buried in the earth. Among the shadows, where light barely touched, a figure emerged, a lone traveler wrapped in the drab colors of a world untouched by time. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if each step carried the weight of centuries. He paused near a clearing where the air seemed to hum with a presence unseen. The traveler was no ordinary man, but one of the Drúedain, the mysterious people whose bond with the earth ran deeper than most dared to understand. From a distance, a group of men watched. They were wary, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords, though they did not draw them. The Drúedain were strange to them, their ways shrouded in mystery. Yet, there was no mistaking the sense of power that lingered around the traveler. It wasn't the kind of power that men craved, dominance, conquest, but something quieter, older, and far more enduring. The men held their breath as the Drúedain knelt before one of the Pukel-men statues, his gnarled hands brushing against the carved stone with a tenderness that seemed out of place in the harshness of the world. The silence stretched on until one of the men, braver, or perhaps more foolish, than the others, stepped forward. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice firm but laced with curiosity. The Drúedain did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough like the bark of an ancient tree, yet it carried a strange kind of music. I am no one, he said, his gaze never leaving the Pukel-men. And yet I am bound to all. This was the essence of the Drúedain, rooted yet untethered, known yet unknowable. Their interactions with men were rare, marked by moments like this, where words were fewer than the unspoken understandings exchanged. The men lowered their weapons, sensing that they were in the presence of something beyond their grasp. It wasn't only men who crossed paths with the Drúedain. In lands far away, where the forests sang in elvish tongues and the rivers sparkled with an unearthly glow, the elves also spoke of their encounters. They told tales of how the Drúedain would appear without warning, walking as though the trees themselves had shaped them. To the elves, who valued beauty and grace, the Drúedain were an enigma. They were not fair of form nor light of step, yet they carried with them a beauty of a different kind, the beauty of the unbroken, the enduring, the true. One tale told of an elven lord who met a Drúedain in the wild woods of Ithilien. The lord, tall and proud, had stopped to rest when he noticed the strange figures sitting by a stream, carving a piece of stone. At first, he thought it a mere man, worn and aged by a hard life. But as he drew closer, he saw the precision in the carving, the way each movement seemed guided by an unseen hand. The Drúedain looked up and, without fear or greeting, handed the elven lord the carving, a tiny Pukel-man, its expression fierce and protective. For you, the Drúedain said simply. A friend for your home. The elven lord took the gift, surprised and moved by the gesture. When he asked the Drúedain what he owed in return, the answer was equally simple: kindness. These encounters, rare as they were, left lasting impressions. The men and elves who met the Drúedain often carried the memory with them for the rest of their lives. The simplicity of their words and actions held a weight that words often failed to capture. The Drúedain were not like the other races. They sought no wealth, no power, no glory. Instead, they sought harmony, a balance that was increasingly rare in a world full of wars and greed. There was another story, darker and tinged with sorrow, of a group of men who ventured too close to a Drúedain settlement. These men, driven by ignorance and fear, believed the Drúedain to be witches or sorcerers. They attacked without warning, setting fire to the Drúedain's homes and scattering their people. As the flames consumed the wooden shelters, the attackers turned to find the Pukel-men standing unscathed amid the chaos. The Drúedain themselves had vanished, their voices lost in the crackling fire, but the statues remained, their eyes filled with silent judgment. The men fled that day, and it was said that their leader never slept soundly again. The weight of the Pukel-men's gaze followed him, haunting his dreams with their unspoken question, why? The elves, too, had their share of misunderstandings. A younger generation, less attuned to the old ways, sometimes dismissed the Drúedain as primitive, their carvings as little more than crude art. But those who lived long enough to remember knew better. They had seen the magic of the Drúedain, felt the protective aura of the Pukel-men, and witnessed the quiet wisdom that came from listening to the earth itself. In these rare moments of connection, whether with men or elves, the Drúedain revealed pieces of themselves. They were a people of the in-between, between light and shadow, life and stone, presence and absence. Through the Pukel-men, they bridged the gap, offering their silent guardianship to a world that often overlooked them. The Pukel-men themselves, standing as silent witnesses, carried the weight of these encounters. Each one seemed imbued with the essence of the Drúedain who had shaped it, their faces capturing something uniquely human yet undeniably other. Men and elves alike would find themselves staring into the carved eyes, feeling as though they were being seen in ways they could not understand. In every gaze, and every carved wrinkle and furrow, there was a question. It lingered in the air, unspoken yet loud in its presence. It asked not of the Drúedain's purpose, but of the intentions of those who looked upon them. Would they respect what was sacred? Or would they fall to the same fears and desires that had plagued so many before? Even as the tales of these encounters faded into legend, the Pukel-men stood unchanged. They remained where they had always been, silent guardians who remembered what others forgot. The wind howled across the mountains, carrying with it the scent of ash and the cries of the wounded. Fires burned in the distance, their glow staining the night sky. In the shadow of the chaos, a small figure stood still, watching, listening. The Drúedain, their faces marked with the wisdom of countless ages, felt the earth beneath their feet tremble. It was not the trembling of fear, nor of storms, but of a world breaking apart. The wars of Middle-earth were relentless, their brutality sparing no one. Armies clashed, blades sang, and blood soaked the soil. For the Drúedain, who had always sought peace and balance, the destruction was unbearable. They had warned of such a time, whispering their truths to those who would listen. But warnings were no match for the greed and ambition that fueled these wars. The Drúedain were caught in the storm, their quiet existence shattered by the noise of battle. They were not warriors, though they were not weak. The Drúedain had their own kind of strength, a resilience rooted in the land, a bond with nature that gave them the power to heal and to protect. But in the face of endless war, even the strongest ties began to fray. The forests that had once sheltered them were now battlegrounds, their sacred spaces trampled under the boots of soldiers who did not care for what was lost. The Pukel-men, once symbols of guardianship and peace, now stood witness to horrors they were never meant to see. Their stone faces remained stoic as the world burned around them, but to those who looked closely, there was a sense of sorrow in their carved expressions. They had been left behind, silent and immovable, as the Drúedain were forced to retreat further and further into obscurity. There was one tale, told in whispers, of a Drúedain village hidden deep within a forest. They had carved Pukel-men to stand at every entrance, their crude yet powerful forms meant to ward off intruders. When war came to their lands, they pleaded with the trees and the stones to hide them. And for a time, it worked. The armies passed by without seeing the village, their eyes drawn elsewhere. But the war spread like fire, consuming everything in its path. One fateful night, the soldiers arrived, their torches lighting the way. The Drúedain did not fight. They stood in a circle around their homes, their hands joined, their voices raised in a song that spoke to the very heart of the earth. The soldiers hesitated, unnerved by the sight, but their orders were clear. The village was destroyed, its people scattered to the winds. When the fires died down, the Pukel-men remained, their faces darkened by smoke but unbroken. Those who passed through the ruins in later years swore they could feel the weight of the Drúedain song lingering in the air, a sorrowful melody that refused to fade. The wars took their toll on every race, but for the Drúedain, it was more than just loss, it was a severing. They had always been connected to the rhythm of the world, to the pulse of life that ran through every living thing. But as the wars raged on, that rhythm grew faint, drowned out by the cries of the dying and the roar of destruction. The Drúedain began to disappear, slipping away like shadows at sunrise. Some said they went to the west, seeking solace in lands untouched by war. Others believed they had become one with the earth, their spirits taking root in the forests and mountains they loved. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain, they left behind the Pukel-men, their silent guardians, as their legacy. The statues stood as reminders of what had been lost, their presence a testament to a people who refused to be forgotten. The Pukel-men, scattered across the lands, became objects of both reverence and fear. Some saw them as protectors, their carved faces a source of comfort in troubled times. Others avoided them, sensing the weight of the sorrow they carried. And yet, they remained, standing watch as the world moved on without the Drúedain. The wars eventually ended, but the scars they left behind would never truly heal. The Drúedain were gone, their voices silenced, but their absence was felt in every quiet moment, and every shadow that lingered just a little too long. The men and elves who had once encountered them spoke of their wisdom, their kindness, their unwavering bond with the world around them. And though the Drúedain themselves had vanished, their spirit lived on in the stories and in the Pukel-men who continued to stand guard. In a forgotten valley, where the grass grew wild and the rivers ran free, a single Pukel-man stood at the edge of a cliff. Its face, weathered by time, gazed out over the vast expanse of Middle-earth. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the echoes of the Drúedain song, a song of loss, of resilience, and of hope. The statue remained, unmoving, a silent witness to the passing ages. And somewhere, in the stillness of the night, the question lingered, were the Drúedain truly gone? Or were they watching still, waiting for the world to remember what it had forgotten? The answer lay not in the stone faces of the Pukel-men, but in the hearts of those who dared to look closer. The air was thick with stillness, the kind that presses on your chest and makes the world feel ancient and alive all at once. A figure stood in the shadows of the forest, carved from stone, its features rough yet deliberate. This was no mere statue. There was a presence about it, as though it carried the weight of the earth itself. The Pukel-men stood rooted, its eyes fixed on something far beyond the horizon, as if watching over not just the land, but the lives bound to it. The Pukel-men had always been more than their stone forms suggested. To those who looked closely, they were symbols of a protection that transcended words. They didn't carry swords or shields, they didn't march into battle. Their guardianship was quiet and enduring, a promise etched into stone. They spoke to something primal, something every living being could feel in the marrow of their bones, the need to protect what matters, no matter the cost. Their forms were strange, almost otherworldly, with wide eyes and broad features that seemed to merge with the natural world around them. These were not the delicate, polished statues of kings or heroes. They were rough and unyielding, shaped by hands that understood the language of the earth. Their simplicity was their strength, a reminder that true guardianship doesn't need grandeur. It needs only steadfastness. In the small villages near the mountains, people whispered stories of the Pukel-men. Some said they were alive, spirits bound to stone who watched over the land. Others believed they were the echoes of the Drúedain, their creators, who had poured their very souls into these statues before disappearing into the mists of time. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the Pukel-men were there, standing between the world and whatever darkness threatened to swallow it whole. There was an old tale of a boy who wandered too far into the forest. The villagers searched for him, their torches casting flickering light on the trees, but they found nothing. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. Then, one morning, the boy stumbled back into the village, his clothes torn and his eyes wide with wonder. He spoke of a figure that had appeared in the forest, silent and unmoving, yet somehow guiding him home. He swore it was one of the Pukel-men, though no statue had ever been seen in that part of the woods. The villagers didn't question him. They simply thanked the silent guardian for bringing their child back. To the Drúedain, who had shaped the Pukel-men with their own hands, these statues were more than symbols. They were extensions of themselves, a way to leave behind a piece of their essence in a world that often forgot them. The Drúedain had always been close to nature, their lives intertwined with the rhythms of the earth. The Pukel-men reflected this harmony. Their forms, rough as tree bark and solid as stone, seemed to grow out of the land itself. They stood as a bridge between people and the natural world, reminding all who saw them that the two were never meant to be separate. There was a peculiar warmth to the Pukel-men, despite their cold stone surfaces. Travelers who passed by them often felt a sense of calm, as though the statues were watching over them, ensuring their safety. In times of trouble, people would gather near the Pukel-men, placing offerings of flowers or food at their feet. They believed the guardians would protect them, not through force, but through the quiet power of their presence. And yet, the Pukel-men were not invincible. Time wore at their features, storms cracked their stone, and wars often left them broken. But even in their ruin, they remained. A fallen Pukel-man was not a symbol of defeat, it was a testament to endurance. Its presence, however battered, was a reminder that protection is not about winning or losing. It's about standing firm, even when the odds are impossible. In the stories passed down through generations, the Pukel-men were always connected to moments of harmony between people and nature. One legend spoke of a great flood that threatened a village. The villagers, desperate and afraid, turned to the Pukel-men on the hillside above their homes. They prayed to the silent figures, asking for their help. That night, as the waters rose, a strange thing happened. The floodwaters stopped just short of the village, as if an invisible barrier had been placed between them and destruction. In the morning, the villagers found the Pukel-men covered in mud and debris, their forms battered but unbowed. Whether it was coincidence or something more, the people never forgot the guardians who had stood watch over them. There was an unspoken understanding that the Pukel-men did not belong to any one race or people. They were for everyone and everything, the forests, the mountains, the rivers, and all the creatures that lived among them. They were a reminder that guardianship is not about power or control. It's about care, about the willingness to stand in defense of something precious without expecting anything in return. The Pukel-men stood as a quiet challenge to a world often obsessed with strength and domination. They were strong, yes, but their strength came from their stillness, their ability to endure. They didn't fight battles or conquer lands. They simply watched, listened, and stood firm. And in their silence, they spoke louder than any words could. There were times when their presence felt almost too much to bear, as if they were silently asking the people who passed by them, "What will you protect? What will you stand for?" These questions lingered long after the statues had disappeared from sight, echoing in the minds of those who had the courage to answer. The Pukel-men stood not just for the Drúedain, but for all who had ever loved something enough to guard it fiercely. They were a promise carved in stone, a promise that even in a world filled with chaos and destruction, there would always be those who stood firm. Their stone faces, weathered and worn, held the memory of a world where people and nature were one, where guardianship was not a burden but an honor. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces of Middle-earth, the Pukel-men waited, their presence as steady as the mountains themselves, their silent watch unbroken. There's something about the Pukel-men that pulls at the heartstrings, a quiet strength that lingers in the air, as if their stone forms are not just statues but vessels of untold stories. Their presence, even in the stillness of Middle-earth, echoes through art, whispers in the corners of myth, and lives in the collective imagination of those who have stood before them. These guardians, standing firm and silent, have become more than just figures in the land. They are symbols, so deeply woven into the fabric of Middle-earth that their existence seems timeless, never fading. Throughout history, the Pukel-men have not been confined to the edges of ancient stone. They've found their place on canvases, in scrolls, and in the hearts of those who seek to understand them. In every brushstroke, every carved line, there's a piece of their quiet power, immortalized for generations to come. To look at their depiction in art is to understand their essence, the rugged stone, the solid, grounded forms that stand in contrast to the transient, fleeting world. Artists have captured them in ways that speak to something deep, as if they were trying to capture not just the figure, but the weight of their guardianship, the silence that speaks louder than words. In the art of Middle-earth, the Pukel-men stand as silent sentinels. They are not often shown in grandiose, heroic scenes, but rather in moments of stillness, of reflection. Perhaps it is in their quiet presence that their true power lies. Where other figures might be depicted with weapons raised or faces full of determination, the Pukel-men are carved in stone, unmoving. The details, however, tell a different story. The curves of their faces, the strength in their bodies, and the intricacy of their design reflect a deep connection to the earth itself. It's as though the very land has shaped them, as if they are an extension of the mountains, forests, and valleys they protect. Some depictions of the Pukel-men show them standing against the backdrop of a fading sunset, their forms silhouetted against the orange and purple hues of the sky. It is in this fading light that their true purpose becomes clear. They are not just figures of the past, they are timeless guardians, watching over the land long after the day's last light has vanished. The air around them seems to hum with quiet energy, as though they are forever attuned to the cycles of the earth. These artworks capture not just their appearance, but the very essence of what it means to be a protector, stoic, enduring, and unshakable. Yet, the Pukel-men's presence stretches beyond Middle-earth itself. Throughout history, other cultures have seen echoes of their form in their own myths, recognizing in them something universal, something shared. The concept of stone guardians, silent figures who stand as protectors of the land, is not unique to the Drúedain. In other lands, across oceans and continents, cultures have told stories of figures who stand against time, guarding sacred spaces, protecting the natural world from those who would seek to harm it. The Pukel-men, though uniquely tied to the mountains of Rohan, are part of a larger, more universal myth. They are not just stone, they are symbols, representing something deep within the human heart. In some cultures, stone statues or figures are thought to hold the spirits of ancestors, watching over the living and ensuring their safety. The Pukel-men, though not strictly ancestral in the same way, hold a similar role. They are embodiments of the past, carrying the weight of their creator's legacy, standing as a bridge between those who have gone and those who remain. The idea that a stone figure could carry the soul of a protector is not just a notion for the Drúedain but a belief shared by many. In art, this concept is often depicted through figures that seem to transcend the boundaries of the physical world, suggesting that they are not merely statues but something more, a force, a presence, a guardian. The way the Pukel-men are portrayed in art speaks to their role as protectors, not just of the land, but of something far greater, harmony. Artists capture them not as warriors or conquerors, but as stewards of the earth, caretakers who have stood against the winds of time without faltering. In these images, there is a quiet dignity to their presence. The harsh lines of their faces are softened by the years, the stone worn by the passage of time, but their gaze remains as steady as ever. These statues are not simply remnants of a bygone people, they are living symbols of something that has endured through the ages, a reminder that the earth is as much a part of us as we are of it. In the quiet corners of galleries and ancient temples, the Pukel-men's legacy continues. They are not forgotten, not lost to the winds of time. Instead, they have become part of the living mythology of Middle-earth, transcending their stone forms to become symbols of guardianship and strength. Their image, rough, unyielding, yet full of quiet wisdom, captures something essential about the human condition. They remind us that there is power in stillness, and simply standing firm when the world around us threatens to crumble. It is this message, this quiet yet powerful presence, that has allowed the Pukel-men to remain a fixture in art and culture long after their creators have faded into history. There's a particular painting that captures the heart of the Pukel-men's symbolism. It shows a single figure standing on a hill, bathed in moonlight. The figure's stone face is stern, yet there is an almost palpable tenderness in its eyes, as if it understands the weight of its responsibility. Around it, the land stretches on forever, wild, untamed, and beautiful. There's a sense of peace in this image, a calm that comes from knowing that something is being protected, that there is someone, something, watching over the land, ensuring that it remains safe, even in the face of great darkness. As Middle-earth stories continue to unfold, the Pukel-men's legacy lives on, not just in the hearts of those who remember them, but in the art that has captured their essence. These silent guardians, in all their weathered glory, remind us of the power of protection, the strength found in stillness, and the beauty of standing firm in the face of whatever comes. They are more than just figures in stone, they are symbols of everything worth guarding, our lands, our people, and the fragile harmony between them. And as long as their images remain in the minds and hearts of those who understand their meaning, they will never truly fade. The wind howls through the hills, carrying whispers of a time long past. In the distance, the stone forms of the Pukel-men stand like silent sentinels against the harsh elements, their faces worn by centuries of weathering. There, amid the rugged wilds of Rohan, they guard not just the land, but the very essence of nature itself. The land they protect is untamed, raw, and unyielding, a wilderness that demands respect and reverence. Yet, it is also a world under constant threat. The balance between civilization and the wild, between man and nature, has always been fragile. And in this delicate balance, the Pukel-men stand unwavering. They are not just statues, they are guardians, carved from the very rock of the land they protect. Each crack in their stone faces, each weathered groove, tells a story of the relentless forces of nature that have shaped them. And yet, despite the passage of time, they remain as steadfast as the mountains themselves, silent witnesses to the ebb and flow of life. The Pukel-men embody something deep within Tolkien's world, a reminder that nature, in all its wild beauty, must be safeguarded from those who would seek to harm it. In Tolkien's work, nature is never just a backdrop. It is a living, breathing entity, full of power and mystery. From the forests of Lothlorien to the rolling hills of the Shire, nature is portrayed as a force that nurtures, protects, and sustains. But it is also a force that can be easily lost, forgotten, or destroyed. And it is here, in the Pukel-men's unyielding watch over the wilds, that Tolkien seems to speak directly to us. Nature is precious, fragile, and worth defending. The Pukel-men's presence in the landscape is a reminder of the bond between the natural world and the beings who call it home. They stand, unmoving, their gaze directed toward the horizon, as if eternally watching over the land, ensuring that the wilderness remains untouched. Their stone forms are both part of the land and separate from it, a symbol of the way in which nature itself can be both timeless and vulnerable. In a world where so much is built and destroyed, they endure. The wilderness, too, must endure. In their stillness, the Pukel-men reflect the quiet power of nature. It is not the power of destruction or conquest, but the power of preservation. Just as the stone statues stand against the winds and rains, so too does the wild landscape resist the pressures of encroaching civilization. The Pukel-men are symbols of that resistance, guardians of a world that exists not for profit, but for its own sake. They remind us that the earth is not ours to dominate, but to protect. Just as the Pukel-men stand firm against the world's harshest forces, so too must we stand firm in our commitment to preserving the natural world. And yet, the Pukel-men are not alone in their role as guardians. They are part of a greater mythology in Tolkien's work, one that includes the Ents, the Eagles, and even the Elves. All of these figures, in their own way, embody the theme of guardianship over nature. The Ents, with their deep connection to the forests, are perhaps the most obvious example. But the Pukel-men, in their own silent way, are just as important. They do not speak or move, but their presence is felt deeply. They are a reminder that even in stillness, there is power. There is something deeply emotional about the idea of the Pukel-men standing as protectors of the wild. In a world that so often values progress, achievement, and growth, it is easy to forget the importance of preservation. We chase after what is new, what is shiny, what is bigger and better. But in the pursuit of more, we often forget the things that matter most: the quiet beauty of nature, the untamed wilderness, the sacred bond between humans and the earth. The Pukel-men, in their stoic presence, force us to confront this truth. They are not interested in grandeur or glory. They are here for something far more important, something that transcends the noise of the world. They are guardians of a world that exists beyond human comprehension, a world that is both ancient and forever new. The Pukel-men's role as protectors of the wilderness is not just about guarding the land from harm, but about preserving the very essence of life. Nature, in all its wild and unpredictable glory, holds something precious, a sense of balance, a harmony that cannot be replicated. The Pukel-men stand as a symbol of that balance, an eternal reminder that the earth is not just a resource to be used, but a living entity that deserves respect. As we look upon the Pukel-men, there is a sense of sadness, too, a sadness for the world that could be lost if we do not care for it. They stand as a reminder of a time when nature was not something to be controlled, but something to be revered. The stone figures, withered and worn, represent a lost age when humanity lived in closer harmony with the land. And yet, even in their stillness, they offer a glimmer of hope. They endure. They stand, silent and strong, as a testament to the resilience of nature itself. In a world where so much is lost, the Pukel-men remain, watching, waiting, guarding. Their presence is a call to action, a plea to all who encounter them to recognize the sacredness of the wild, to understand that the earth is not just something to be used, but something to be protected. And though the Pukel-men may never speak, their message is clear: the wilderness is worth saving, and it is our responsibility to ensure that it endures for generations to come. They remind us that there is more to life than what we can build or conquer. Sometimes, the greatest act of strength is simply standing still, watching over what matters most. As the wind shifts and the sun sets behind the hills, the Pukel-men remain. Guardians of the wild, protectors of nature, standing firm in the face of a world that often forgets what is truly important. A lone figure sat at the edge of the forest, eyes closed, hands resting lightly on the earth. The air was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the faint hum of unseen life moving through the undergrowth. For the Drúedain, this was not silence. It was a sacred symphony, a living voice that spoke to their hearts. They did not seek to control the wild, they listened to it, their spirits attuned to its every whisper. It was this bond, this unspoken connection, that shaped their lives and their legends. The Pukel-men, carved by their hands, were more than stone figures. They were vessels of a belief that ran as old as the hills themselves. To the Drúedain, every rock, tree, and stream held a spirit. The earth was alive, a breathing entity that cradled all living things. And these stone guardians stood as silent storytellers of this truth. Each carved face, each rough-hewn body, held a part of their creator's souls, a testament to their faith that the spirit of the land could be made tangible, eternal. The Drúedain were not warriors in the traditional sense. They did not conquer or seek to dominate. Their strength lay in their understanding, and their ability to see what others overlooked. While kings and armies saw land as a prize to be won, the Drúedain saw it as sacred ground, alive with memories and power. Their carvings were not mere art, they were prayers set in stone, calling upon the spirits to protect the wild from harm. The Pukel-men, with their fierce and watchful expressions, stood as both warnings and blessings. They did not threaten violence, but carried the weight of ancient wisdom, an unyielding reminder of the balance that must not be broken. There are tales, whispered in the stillness of night, of the Drúedain breathing life into their creations. Travelers who ventured too close to the forest spoke of stone figures moving when no one was watching, their eyes glowing faintly under the pale light of the moon. Whether these stories were true or born of fear did not matter. What mattered was the power they held. The Pukel-men were more than guardians. They were living symbols of the Drúedain's belief in the interconnectedness of all things. The spiritual beliefs of the Drúedain were not grand or complex, but they carried a weight that could silence even the mightiest of men. To them, the world was a circle, everything connected, everything depended on each other. They walked lightly on the earth, knowing that every step carried consequences. Their lives were woven into the fabric of the land, and they gave back to it as much as they took. The Pukel-men reflected this harmony, their stoic forms reminding all who saw them that the earth remembers. It remembers kindness, and it remembers harm. There is an ache in the thought of the Drúedain's prayers etched into stone, prayers for a world they knew was slipping away. They were not blind to the ambitions of men, to the greed that cut down forests and scarred the hills. The Pukel-men were their response, their silent protest. They could not stop the destruction, but they could bear witness to it. And in their stillness, they carried the hopes of a people who believed, against all odds, that the land could heal. In the hearts of the Drúedain, the wilderness was not a thing to fear, but a thing to cherish. They understood its dangers, yes, but they also saw its beauty, its necessity. To walk through the woods was to walk through a sacred space, every step a conversation with the spirits of the trees, the rivers, the stones. This reverence was what gave the Pukel-men their power. They were not just statues, they were a bridge between the physical world and the unseen forces that guided it. The stories of the Drúedain tell of their deep connection to these unseen forces. It was said that they could sense the emotions of the land, hear its cries of pain, feel its moments of joy. This bond was not magic in the way that wizards wielded power, but something quieter, more profound. The Drúedain did not seek to bend the earth to their will, they sought to honor it, to live in harmony with it. The Pukel-men were born from this belief, their forms a reflection of the Drúedain's unshakable faith in the spirit of the wild. Some say that when the Drúedain carved the Pukel-men, they sang to them. The songs were not for human ears, but for the spirits they called upon, their voices weaving a tapestry of hope and protection. These songs lingered in the air, faint and haunting, long after the Drúedain themselves had vanished from the forests. And perhaps, if one listens closely enough, those songs can still be heard, carried on the wind that moves through the hills. The Pukel-men stand as a reminder of what the Drúedain knew to be true, that the land is alive, that it feels, that it remembers. Their withered faces seem to watch the world with a kind of sorrow, as if mourning the loss of the people who created them. But there is strength in their stillness, a quiet defiance that speaks of a legacy that cannot be erased. They are more than stone, they are the spirit of the Drúedain made eternal. In the shadow of these guardians, one can almost feel the presence of the Drúedain themselves. Their hands once smoothed the rough edges of the stone, their voices once called to the spirits of the land. Though they are gone, their belief lives on in the Pukel-men. These statues, these silent protectors, carry within them the essence of a people who understood what it meant to truly belong to the earth. The Pukel-men, with their haunting gazes and unyielding forms, stand as both a warning and a blessing. They are a warning to those who would harm the land, a reminder that the earth is not theirs to destroy. But they are also a blessing, a symbol of hope for those who seek to protect it. They are the spirit of the Drúedain, eternal and unbroken, watching over the wilderness they loved so fiercely. In the heart of the forest, where sunlight filters through a canopy so thick it feels like the world beyond has vanished, there stands a figure. At first glance, it might seem like another Pukel-men, its rough surface blending into the ancient trees. But then it moves, slowly, deliberately, and a breath catches in the throat. This is no statue. It is one of the Wasses, the living Drúedain. They carry with them an aura, a sense of timelessness, as if they've stepped out of an age long forgotten to guard a truth the world is too distracted to remember. The Wasses are the heartbeat of the Drúedain's legacy. Their presence is like the whisper of wind through the leaves, subtle but impossible to ignore. They are not just protectors of the land, but also of the spirit that flows through it, the same spirit the Pukel-men embody in their silent vigilance. The Wasses live as their ancestors once did, in harmony with a world that others often overlook. They are the bridge between the tangible stone guardians and the unseen lifeblood of the wilderness. Their faces, weathered like ancient bark, tell stories without words. Each line, each crease, speaks of years spent listening to the earth's sighs and cries. There is no need for speech when they walk among the Pukel-men. It is as though the statues recognize them, bowing in silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. The Wasses, in turn, seem to draw strength from the stone, their hands brushing lightly against the carvings as if reconnecting with an old friend. It is said that the Wasses have an unbroken bond with the land, a bond so profound that they can sense its pain and joy as keenly as their own. When a tree falls to careless hands or a stream is choked with filth, they feel it as a wound in their own flesh. This connection is not a burden to them, it is a sacred duty. Through their quiet vigilance, they honor the spirits their ancestors revered, the same spirits that breathe through the Pukel-men. The Wasses are not what the world would call beautiful, but there is a kind of beauty in their strength, in the way they carry the weight of their heritage with quiet pride. Their movements are deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if every step they take is in sync with the rhythm of the earth beneath them. They do not adorn themselves with jewels or fine cloth, their adornments are the wildflowers woven into their hair, the faint scent of pine and earth that clings to their skin. There are stories of travelers who have encountered the Wasses and come away forever changed. One speaks of a man who, lost in the forest and near despair, stumbled upon a woe standing still as a tree. At first, he thought it a Pukel-man until the figure turned its head, its eyes meeting his with an intensity that stopped his heart. The woe said nothing, but in that gaze, the man felt the weight of his own life, his own choices. He later swore that the forest itself had spoken to him through that silent figure, urging him to live in a way that honored the world around him. The Wasses' connection to the Pukel-men is more than symbolic, it is a living bond. The statues are their companions, their teachers. To the Wasses, the Pukel-men are not relics of the past, but reminders of a truth that remains eternal. The stone figures, standing steadfast against the passage of time, inspire the Wasses to do the same. In return, the Wasses breathe life into the legacy of the Drúedain, ensuring that the spirit of the Pukel-men does not fade into forgotten lore. There is a quiet power in the way the Wasses move through the world. They do not seek to dominate or change it, but to protect it, to preserve the harmony that others too often destroy. They are the keepers of balance, their lives a testament to the wisdom of living lightly on the earth. This wisdom is not something they shout or preach, it is something they embody, their every action a reflection of their beliefs. The Wasses' relationship with the wilderness is one of mutual respect. They do not see themselves as separate from the forest, the rivers, the hills. They are part of it, as much as the trees and the stones are. When they carve new Pukel-men, they do so with reverence, as if asking the spirits of the land for permission. Each carving is a prayer, a promise to continue the work their ancestors began. There is a haunting beauty in the way the Wasses live. Their lives are simple, but that simplicity hides a depth of understanding that few could grasp. They know the songs of the birds, the whispers of the wind, the language of the stars. They do not need books or scrolls to learn, the world itself is their teacher, and they listen with an openness that others have forgotten. For those who have glimpsed the wasses in their element, there is a sense of having touched something sacred. These living Drúedain are more than just guardians, they are the living essence of the spirit the Pukel-men were created to honor. In their presence, the world feels larger, more alive, as if the veil between the seen and unseen has grown thin. And yet, the wasses are not immune to sorrow. They see the harm done to the world, the forests felled, the rivers poisoned. They feel the loss of their kin, the Drúedain who have vanished into history. But their sorrow does not break them, it strengthens their resolve. They carry their grief like a stone in their hearts, heavy but grounding, a reminder of what they fight to protect. The Pukel-men stand as silent witnesses to the wasses' efforts, their weathered faces seeming to watch over their living kin with an expression of eternal patience. Together, the wasses and the Pukel-men form a partnership that transcends time, a partnership born of a shared purpose, a shared belief in the sanctity of the natural world. In the shadow of these living Drúedain, one cannot help but feel the weight of their legacy. The wasses are not just preserving the past, they are living it, keeping its spirit alive with every breath they take. And as the forest hums with life around them, it is clear that the wasses and the Pukel-men are not merely part of the wilderness. They are the wilderness, its heart and its soul, unbroken and eternal. The forest was silent, cloaked in a stillness so profound it felt like the world itself had paused. Shadows stretched long and sharp as the fading light of day kissed the edges of ancient stones. Among the trees stood the Pukel-men, weathered sentinels carved from time and myth. Their faces, etched with lines of sorrow and wisdom, seemed to watch and wait. Some swore you could feel their gaze, heavy and knowing, as if the stone figures bore witness to the whispers of the earth and the cries of the wind. There were stories, old ones, passed down in hushed voices around flickering fires, that spoke of these statues awakening. Not in the sense of shifting slightly or trembling under the weight of centuries, but fully rising, stepping down from their mossy pedestals, their stone hands grasping at the air as if shaking off dreams. They would stir, it was said, when the land itself cried out in anguish, when the balance between life and destruction tipped too far into ruin. The legend spoke of great peril, times when invading forces trampled sacred groves or desecrated the sanctuaries of the wilderness. In these dire moments, the Pukel-men would not remain silent. They would awaken with a thunderous sound like the crack of mountains splitting, their stone forms coming to life with a purpose both terrifying and beautiful. These tales are not easily dismissed, for those who tell them speak with an intensity that leaves little room for doubt. It's as if the belief itself lends power to the idea, breathing a flicker of life into the very notion that stone might one day move. A mother once told her child, cradling him close in the shadow of a Pukel-man, of how her own grandmother had seen them awaken. They came, she whispered, in the dead of night when the sky burned red with fire from the east. She described how the ground trembled beneath their feet, how the forest seemed to bend and bow as if it, too, recognized the awakening. The Pukel-men, she claimed, were not angry but purposeful, their movements measured as if every step held the weight of an oath sworn in stone. The invaders, she said, fled before them, their hearts gripped with a terror they could not name. The land was left scarred but saved, the guardians returning to their silent vigil as if nothing had happened. Yet those who had witnessed it could never look at the statues the same way again. They saw not cold stone but sleeping giants, guardians bound by a promise older than memory. Some stories were quieter, speaking of smaller awakenings. A farmer in despair, his fields choked by drought, once prayed at the feet of a Pukel-man, asking not for rain but for hope. The next morning, he found the soil damp and rich, a single footprint pressed into the earth near his crops, a footprint far too large to be human. He never questioned how it came to be, only that it was a gift. The myths do not agree on what drives the awakening. Some say it is the cries of the Drúedain, their descendants, that call them back from their slumber. Others believe it is the land itself, its pain too great to bear, that stirs them to action. Whatever the reason, there is one detail that remains constant in every tale. The Pukel-men rise only for the sake of protection, their power unleashed only to heal and to defend. Yet, there is a sadness that lingers in these legends. The awakening of the Pukel-men is not a celebration but a mourning, a final act of desperation when all else has failed. It is said that they do not awaken without cost, for each movement chips away at their eternal form, leaving behind fragments of their strength. Some believe this is why the Pukel-men stand so still, their faces carved with sorrow. They know that to awaken is to sacrifice, to trade their silent immortality for the fleeting chance to save what they hold dear. In the forest, on nights when the wind howls and the stars hide behind thick clouds, some swear they hear the faintest sound of stone grinding against stone. Others claim to see faint glimmers of light in the eyes of the Pukel-men, like the dying embers of a fire struggling to burn again. These moments spark fear and awe in equal measure, for to witness such a thing is to stand on the edge of the ordinary and the extraordinary. Children are told to respect the Pukel-men, to never touch them carelessly or speak ill of their watchfulness. Some leave offerings at their feet, wildflowers, smooth stones, or bits of honeycomb, as a gesture of thanks or perhaps as a way to ensure they remain still. They hear more than you think, the elders say, their voices trembling with the weight of the words. The legends have left their mark, not just on the people who live near the Pukel-men, but on the land itself. Trails wind carefully around the statues, and trees seem to grow taller and stronger in their presence. Even the animals seem to recognize something sacred, their path steering clear of the stone sentinels as if out of respect or fear. There is a particular story, told in fragments, about a Pukel-man that never returned to its place after awakening. It is said that it wandered the forest, its stone feet carving deep grooves into the earth, searching for something it had lost. No one knows what became of it, but on certain nights, travelers have reported hearing the faint echo of footsteps far too heavy to belong to any creature of flesh and blood. These tales, these whispered accounts of the Pukel-men's awakening, are more than just myths. They are reminders of the power of belief, of the connection between stone and spirit, and of the cost of protection. The Pukel-men are not merely carved figures standing against the decay of time. They are guardians, bound by a love for the land so fierce it transcends life itself. And though they remain silent, their very presence hums with the possibility of what might come to pass should their world fall into peril again. The forest stood quiet and still, as if holding its breath. A faint breeze stirred the leaves, their rustling whispering like a secret being passed between the trees. In the heart of this ancient woodland, the Pukel-men remained motionless, their stone forms standing sentinel, carved with a timeless patience. But if you listened closely enough, there was something more, a strange, subtle energy that hung in the air. It was as though they were not just statues, but something more, creations that carried with them the weight of an ancient promise, something shaped by hands far beyond the mortal realm. No one truly knew how they had come to be, these strange figures of stone. Some said they were born from the earth itself, carved by the land to protect it. Others whispered of a higher power, an influence that shaped them with purpose and care. The stories of the Pukel-men held a sense of mystery, but the whispers never ceased. Could it be that the Vala, the great and powerful beings of legend, had a hand in their creation? It was Yavanna, the protector of nature, who stood out in these tales. She, who loved the living things of Middle-earth, every tree, every plant, every blade of grass, was said to have a deep bond with the earth itself. She could hear the cries of the land and feel its pain when it was hurt. Could it be that Yavanna, in her boundless love for nature, created the Pukel-men to stand as silent sentinels over the forests and fields, watching over the creatures and plants that she so cherished? The thought seemed to breathe life into the stone statues, as if Yavanna's touch lingered within them, her spirit entwined with theirs. In the quiet spaces between the trees, you could almost feel her presence, a warmth in the air, a softness in the soil beneath your feet, as if the earth itself were whispering secrets from another time. There was a deep sense of protection in the air, a feeling that the land itself was alive with care and love. Perhaps, in the early days, when the first seeds of life took root in Middle-earth, Yavanna had seen the need for guardians, beings that would protect the delicate balance of nature. She had known that the forces of destruction and greed would one day come to threaten the land. It was her gift, her duty, to ensure that nature remained whole, unspoiled by the march of time and the greed of men. And so, it was whispered, she called upon the earth to create these guardians, creatures of stone, but with hearts that beat in rhythm with the land. The Pukel-men were not just guardians of the land, they were its living memory. They carried the weight of centuries in their forms, standing not just as protectors but as witnesses to the changing world around them. Their stony faces seemed to hold the knowledge of every tree that had grown tall, every river that had flowed, every storm that had passed. They were the embodiment of the earth's resilience, its strength, its ability to endure. The influence of Yavanna was not only seen in the Pukel-men's purpose, but in the very way they were shaped. Yavanna's love for all things that grew had imbued them with a deep connection to nature. Their figures, though carved in stone, seemed to echo the shapes of trees and vines, their faces and bodies molded in the likeness of the very earth they were created to protect. It was as though she had breathed life into them, weaving her spirit into their stone forms, and now they stood, silent but ever watchful, awaiting the time when they would rise again. The idea that the Pukel-men might have been created by Yavanna, or at least influenced by her, is more than a passing thought. It is a possibility rooted in the deep love and respect she had for the natural world. Her power was not just in shaping trees and flowers, but in breathing life into all things that grew. She had the ability to connect with the essence of nature itself. It was this connection that gave the Pukel-men their strength, their ability to withstand the passage of time, and their unwavering dedication to protecting the land. And yet, despite this divine influence, there was something hauntingly human about the Pukel-men. Perhaps it was their silence, the stillness of their forms that made them seem almost alive in a way that nothing else in the world could. They were not like the creatures that walked the earth, they were something different, something eternal. As the years turned to centuries, the stories of the Pukel-men grew. Some spoke of the way the wind would whip through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of voices, voices that spoke in languages long forgotten, and words that seemed to echo the teachings of Yavanna herself. Others said they could see flickers of movement in the stone figures at dusk, a fleeting motion that could almost be mistaken for the sway of a tree's branches. Could it be that Yavanna had given them the gift of watching over the land? Or perhaps, in her infinite wisdom, she had allowed them to be a reminder of something greater than themselves, a reminder of the importance of balance, of the need to protect what is fragile and sacred. The Pukel-men were more than guardians, they were symbols, living testaments to the care that the earth itself required. And as the years wore on, the people of the land began to understand the true significance of the Pukel-men. They weren't just statues to be admired from a distance. They were part of something larger, something beyond comprehension. They were the eternal watchmen, standing guard over the earth, carrying within them the spirit of Yavanna's love for all things wild and untamed. Their presence was a constant reminder that the land must be protected, that nature could not survive on its own. It was not just the work of the Vala that had brought them into being, but the collective duty of all who lived in Middle-earth to honor and protect the earth's beauty and vitality. The Pukel-men, like Yavanna herself, stood as guardians of a fragile, delicate world, one that required constant care to preserve its integrity. The question, then, was never whether the Pukel-men would awaken. It was when. Would they rise again, as they had done in times past, to defend the land from the ravages of destruction? Or would they remain silent, waiting for the world to remember what had been forgotten? Only time could tell, but one thing was certain. They were always watching, always waiting, their stony forms ever present in the quiet of the forest, their connection to the earth as strong as the roots of the trees themselves. And so, the legacy of the Pukel-men lived on, a testament to the enduring power of Yavanna's love for the world she had created and the guardians who stood, eternal and steadfast, to protect it. The sky above the White Mountains darkened, not from storm clouds, but from a sense of dread that hung heavy over the land. Somewhere, unseen to all but the most attuned, a shadow stretched its fingers toward every corner of Middle-earth. It was the shadow of the One Ring, carrying the weight of unspeakable power and inevitable ruin. The land itself seemed to shudder under its presence, as if even the roots of the oldest trees and the bones of the mountains could feel its pull. Beneath the ancient eaves of the Drúadan Forest, the Pukel-men stood silent, their carved faces staring into a world teetering on the edge of chaos. There were whispers that the Pukel-men were not just silent guardians, but watchers who could sense the great tides of power shifting in the world. Did they know of the One Ring? Could they feel the weight of its influence as it passed near their forest? There was a peculiar stillness in the air, as if the stone figures were holding their breath, waiting for something. Perhaps they understood more than anyone had ever guessed. Perhaps their connection to the ancient powers of Middle-earth tied them, in some way, to this object of unimaginable destruction. The War of the Ring was not just a conflict of men, elves, and orcs. It was a battle that resonated through the very fabric of the world. And the Pukel-men, rooted in that fabric, could not have been unaffected. Their presence during this time was no coincidence. It was as though they had been placed there by some unseen hand, not merely to watch, but to stand as a reminder of something long forgotten. Some said that the Pukel-men had always stood against the corrupting forces of power. They were created not for war but for balance, their forms a reflection of the earth's quiet strength. The One Ring, on the other hand, was the embodiment of imbalance, a concentration of malice and domination. The very existence of the ring was an affront to everything the Pukel-men symbolized. Could it be that they felt its approach, that their silent vigil grew heavier as the ring came closer to their lands? When the Rohirrim made their desperate march to Gondor, cutting through the Drúadan Forest with the guidance of Gondor and his kin, the Pukel-men remained unmoving. But their presence was felt. The riders could sense the weight of unseen eyes watching them, their horses snorting and shying away from the towering figures. Were the Pukel-men simply guardians of the forest, or was there something more in their stillness? Perhaps they were aware of what was at stake in the War of the Ring, their stone faces turned not toward the riders, but toward the greater threat looming on the horizon. Some believe the Pukel-men had a role in the events of the war, though their actions were not seen by mortal eyes. It is said that their connection to the land allowed them to sense the footsteps of the servants of Sauron, to feel the tremors of evil spreading across Middle-earth. Perhaps they served as silent protectors, their unseen presence deterring darker forces from venturing too close to the forest. There were moments during the war when the forest seemed to breathe, the air heavy with a presence that was almost tangible. Orcs who strayed too near spoke of feeling watched, of hearing whispers in the wind that sent shivers down their spines. Some even claimed to see movement among the Pukel-men, brief flashes of stone limbs shifting as if preparing to rise. Were these stories merely the product of frightened minds, or did the Pukel-men truly stir, their ancient purpose awakened by the threat of the ring? The One Ring carried a weight that was felt by all who came near it, its corrupting influence seeping into the hearts of men and bending even the strongest wills. But the Pukel-men were of stone, unyielding and steadfast. Could they have resisted its pull, standing as an unbreakable barrier against the darkness it brought? Perhaps their silent nature was their strength, their refusal to bend or break a quiet defiance against the power of the ring. And yet, the question lingered, what would have happened if the ring had come to the Drúadan Forest? Would the Pukel-men have risen, not to claim it, but to protect the land from its poison? Their forms were carved with the intent of guardianship, their presence a testament to the enduring spirit of Middle-earth. It is almost unbearable to imagine their stone forms rising, their heavy limbs moving with purpose, as they stood against the forces of Sauron. But they did not move. They remained silent, their purpose unfulfilled in those days. Perhaps it was not their time, or perhaps their role was not to act but to endure, to stand as witnesses to a world fighting for its soul. The War of the Ring was not won by stone, but by the hearts and wills of those who resisted the pull of power. And yet, the Pukel-men were there, watching, waiting, their connection to the greater forces of Middle-earth unbroken. It is said that the Pukel-men are timeless, their purpose not bound by the events of a single age. They remain, their presence a reminder of the cost of imbalance and the enduring strength of the earth. The War of the Ring may have passed, but the Pukel-men stand still, their stone faces turned toward the horizon as if waiting for the next great test. The forest was quiet except for the whispers of the wind threading through the trees. Standing alone, a weathered statue seemed alive in its stillness, its ancient features worn but proud. The stone figure was neither forgotten nor ignored. Somewhere, across countless homes and hearts, people painted, wrote, and sculpted, breathing new life into its story. The Pukel-men lived again, not in movement, but in the art and voices of those who dared to reimagine them. Fan art paints them in striking colors, some wrapped in moss and vines, their faces serene, like guardians of a lost world. Others show them as protectors rising to battle, their stone limbs imbued with the fury of the earth itself. Each depiction carries a unique emotion, hope, strength, even sorrow. The artist's hands bring the Drúedain out of shadowy lore into vibrant, beating life. In these creations, the Pukel-men are no longer silent. They whisper through brushstrokes and pixelated lines, their tales echoing in galleries and forums. A young artist might sketch one with a childlike curiosity, imagining what it would feel like to stand beneath their towering forms. Another might render them as fierce warriors, carving their shapes into digital realms where the ancient meets the modern. It's as if every pencil stroke, every sweep of color, brings the artist closer to understanding something they cannot touch but can feel deeply. Adaptations of their story also ripple across new mediums. Writers weave their presence into new narratives, often taking liberties to expand their mystery. They wonder, what if the Pukel-men were not bound by stone? What if they moved among us, unseen but protective, silent but watching? These stories place them in the heart of grander conflicts, imagining their silent strength as the foundation of hope in a world shaken by chaos. And then there are the voices of academics, who pore over Tolkien's words with a devotion as steady as the Pukel-men's vigil. Their discussions are filled with awe and reverence, asking questions not just about the lore but about what the Drúedain mean to us now. They connect the Pukel-men to ancient myths of stone guardians found in real-world cultures, speculating about their origins and purpose in Tolkien's creation. These discussions don't just analyze, they breathe meaning into the Drúedain, treating them as reflections of human dreams and fears. One scholar reflects on their timelessness, how they seem rooted in an age when the world was quieter, when the forests were vast and deep, and the line between nature and magic blurred. Another focuses on their craftsmanship, seeing in their forms an echo of humanity's love for creating something that endures. Together, these voices create a mosaic of thought, each piece connecting to the idea that the Pukel-men, in their silence, speak louder than words. A simple clay sculpture of a Pukel-man might sit on a shelf, small and unassuming, yet powerful in what it represents. Someone carefully molded its face, following Tolkien's descriptions, adding their own touch of imagination. It might look stoic or slightly playful, depending on the hands that shaped it. For its maker, it's more than a figurine, it's a connection to a story that has lingered in their heart, a story they want to hold onto in a tangible way. Even in cosplay, the Pukel-men appear. At conventions and gatherings, you might see someone walking slowly, their body painted to resemble weathered stone, their movements deliberate as if channeling the spirit of the Drúedain. The crowd might pause, some people stopping to take photos, others struck by the weight of a presence they can't quite explain. In those moments, the Pukel-men transcend their fictional origins, becoming something real. In every medium, the Drúedain find voices they never had. Each interpretation carries its own emotion, its own purpose. Some portray them as protectors, holding the line between chaos and order. Others show them as symbols of nature's enduring power, reminding us of the Earth's resilience even in the face of destruction. And yet, others explore their solitude, painting them as lonely figures burdened with the weight of an ancient duty. The collective effort of fans, creators, and scholars turns the Pukel-men into something more than stone. They become reflections of ourselves, our longing for connection, our need to protect, our reverence for the natural world. Every brushstroke, word, and thought devoted to them is a tribute to their quiet power, a testament that even the silent can be heard. Yet their story doesn't feel complete. The Pukel-men stand as they always have, waiting, their purpose unclear but unbroken. What secrets remain carved into their silent faces, and who will listen next? A shadow looms over the forest, where silence reigns except for the rustling of leaves. There, standing as if they had always been, are the stone figures, faces carved with expressions of quiet vigilance, their presence both grounding and otherworldly. Though they belong to Tolkien's Middle-earth, echoes of their essence ripple far beyond its boundaries. The Pukel-men are not confined to their tale, they have inspired countless creations, seeding ideas into the vast gardens of modern fantasy. In some stories, their influence is clear, shaping beings that guard hidden lands or protect forgotten secrets. Stone giants rise in other tales, their movements slow and deliberate, as if time itself bows to their steps. Writers and filmmakers often weave these inspirations subtly, allowing the spirit of the Pukel-men to breathe within new creations. A shadow here, a whispered legend there, and suddenly, you feel them watching from the edges of your imagination. Video games have embraced their likeness, too. In pixelated forests and sprawling virtual landscapes, players encounter stone guardians that stand watch over sacred ruins. They are not mere obstacles or relics, they feel alive, imbued with an unspoken history. Some games take their inspiration further, crafting entire races of stone creatures who embody loyalty, wisdom, and a deep connection to the earth. The Pukel-men's essence finds a new home here, where players can interact, battle, or even befriend them. Films and television have also caught glimpses of their shadows. A stone sentinel might stand motionless in the background of a fantasy scene, its stillness speaking volumes. Or perhaps a character recounts a tale of protectors who awaken in times of dire need, their strength tied to the land they serve. These moments, brief yet powerful, carry the weight of the Pukel-men's influence, showing how their story resonates even when not explicitly told. Artists and sculptors find inspiration in their forms, crafting works that honor their silent might. From small figurines to towering statues, these creations capture the Pukel-men's mystery and power. Some pieces depict them as somber protectors, while others highlight their connection to nature, their stone bodies entwined with vines and moss. Each creation is a tribute, a reminder that the Pukel-men's story is far from forgotten. Books have not been immune to their presence. Fantasy authors, inspired by Tolkien's vision, introduce characters or races that echo the Drúedain strength and wisdom. In these tales, they often serve as guardians or guides, their silence masking a profound understanding of the world around them. Through these pages, the Pukel-men's spirit travels, touching readers who might never have encountered them otherwise. Even in modern myths, where the line between fiction and reality blurs, the influence of the Pukel-men can be felt. Conspiracy theories and urban legends sometimes speak of ancient stone figures with a hidden purpose, as if the Pukel-men have stepped out of Tolkien's world and into ours. These tales capture the same mix of awe and unease, reminding us that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The Pukel-men's legacy is not limited to their original story. Their quiet strength, their connection to nature, and their enduring mystery have inspired countless creators, leaving a mark on popular culture that cannot be erased. Their influence grows with every new interpretation, every whisper of their story woven into another. But what more could their presence mean? What more might they awaken in the hearts of those who see them? The wind moved softly through the ancient forest, brushing against the rugged stone faces that stood silently among the trees. They had no voice, yet their presence spoke louder than words. It was as if the earth itself had given them life to remind those who passed of something lost but not forgotten. The Pukel-men, carved from stone yet brimming with a quiet power, stood as guardians not only of the paths they protected but also of timeless lessons buried deep in the heart of Middle-earth. Their story is one of simplicity. In a world often consumed by grandeur and chaos, the Pukel-men were rooted in the earth, tied to its rhythms and whispers. Their lives, though understated, carried profound meaning. There were no crowns, no thrones, no tales of conquest, yet their existence was a testament to a wisdom that transcends fleeting glory. In the stillness of their forms, they taught that strength is not always loud, and presence does not demand attention. There's something hauntingly beautiful about their guardianship. They watched over their lands not with aggression, but with devotion, a quiet promise to protect without expectation. Their stony figures reflected an enduring commitment to safeguarding what they held sacred, a lesson often forgotten in a world driven by possession and control. They showed that true guardianship is an act of love, not dominance, a responsibility rather than a right. And then there was their harmony with nature. Their forms, though sculpted, felt like an extension of the forest itself. Moss crept along their stone shoulders, vines curled around their bases, and the earth welcomed them as one of its own. The Pukel-men existed not in defiance of the wild but as part of it. They were reminders that the greatest strength comes from unity, not division, and that humanity, for all its ambition, is but a guest in nature's vast domain. To stand before them, even in thought, is to feel the weight of time. The Pukel-men carry no weapons, yet they bear a strength far greater than steel. They invite reflection, urging those who encounter their memory to question the noise and speed of their own lives. They teach the value of roots, of being grounded in purpose and unshaken by storms. But what of their enduring silence? In a world where words often drown out meaning, their quiet presence speaks volumes. The Pukel-men remind us that silence can be powerful, even transformative. It is in silence that one can hear the whispers of the trees, the heartbeat of the earth, and the truths hidden beneath the surface. It is in silence that one can understand the unspoken bond between protector and protected. And yet, for all their stillness, there is a feeling that the Pukel-men are not lifeless. Their faces, worn and weathered, seem to watch with unseen eyes. There is a sense that they wait, not for praise or recognition, but for the moment when their guardianship will once again be needed. They remind us that protection is eternal, that care for the earth and its wonders does not end, even when the world looks away. In their quiet existence, the Pukel-men teach the beauty of simplicity, the power of harmony, and the sacredness of the bond between protector and nature. Their lessons are etched not just in stone but in the hearts of those who stop to listen. Yet, as the wind whispers through the trees and the shadows stretch across the forest floor, one must wonder, what more could they be waiting for? What story do their unblinking faces hold that remains untold? The forest was still, its ancient trees towering like sentinels over a forgotten world. Somewhere, deep within the dense embrace of the wild, stood the stone figures, watching, waiting, enduring. The Pukel-men were neither alive nor dead, neither present nor absent. They existed in a state that defied time, their forms etched with the care of hands long gone, their purpose unbroken even as the ages wore on. Each crack in their weathered faces seemed to hold a story, each moss-covered curve whispered of a past not entirely lost. They stood, as they always had, silent witnesses to the passage of time, to the rise and fall of kingdoms, to the triumphs and tragedies that swept across Middle-earth. Their presence was not commanding, yet it was impossible to ignore. They lingered on the edge of perception, ancient guardians whose watchful eyes seemed to penetrate the soul. In their immobility lay a kind of defiance. While the world changed around them, mountains crumbling, rivers shifting, and forests fading, they stood unmoved, tethered to a promise made long before memory. What did they protect? Was it the land, the paths, or something far greater, something invisible and eternal? The answer felt just out of reach, lingering like a shadow in the corner of one's mind. And yet, their silence carried weight. It spoke of an unyielding duty, of a bond forged in an era when the world was young, when the Vala still walked among the living. There was an aching beauty in their vigil, a sense of purpose that transcended the mortal understanding of time. They were not bound by the fleeting ambitions of men or the fragile alliances of elves. Their loyalty was older, deeper, rooted in the very essence of the earth. It is said that those who lingered near the Pukel-men felt a stirring in their hearts, a strange pull that they could not explain. Was it a memory, something buried in the collective soul of all who walked Middle-earth? Or was it the faint echo of a power long thought to be lost? Whatever it was, it left its mark, a feeling that lingered long after the stone faces had vanished from sight. The Pukel-men did not ask for recognition, nor did they crave the adoration of those who passed. Their purpose was quiet and unwavering, their existence a reminder of a different kind of strength. They stood as protectors, not of treasures or crowns, but of something far more precious, the harmony of the world, the balance that made life possible. Even in their stillness, they seemed alive. Their faces, rough and weathered, held an uncanny expression, as if they were on the cusp of speech. And though no words escaped their lips, their silence spoke volumes. It spoke of patience and resilience, of the kind of guardianship that does not waver, even when the world has forgotten what is being guarded. The Pukel-men's legacy reached beyond the borders of their forest. In the hearts of those who remembered them, they became symbols of something profound. They represented the idea that true strength does not always roar. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and unshakable. They reminded those who heard their story that protection is not about control but about care, about holding sacred what others might overlook. But their watch was not without its burdens. To stand eternally, to hold a vigil that spans the ages, is no small task. There was a sorrow in their eyes, a quiet grief for the world they once knew, for the paths they guarded that had grown over with time, for the promises made to a land that no longer remembered their names. And yet, they did not falter. They stood because it was their purpose, their reason for being. In their enduring presence lay a lesson, a reminder of what it means to be a protector, to dedicate oneself to something greater. The Pukel-men taught that the truest guardianship is selfless, that it is not about power or glory, but about preserving what is good and true, even when no one is watching. And so, they remain, timeless and unyielding, their stony faces etched with the weight of countless years. To some, they are merely relics, forgotten markers of an age-long past. But to those who listen, who feel the quiet hum of their presence, they are something more. They are eternal watchers, silent protectors of a world that has moved on without them. The forest shifts around them, the seasons pass, and the world turns. But the Pukel-men stand, their eyes fixed on an unseen horizon, their purpose as unshakable as the stone from which they were carved. And somewhere, in the stillness of their watch, one cannot help but feel that they are waiting for what, no one can say. But their vigil continues, unbroken, unwavering, eternal.